Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Welcome to Live with Lys. Today we are talking about succession planning for law firms. And this is not a usual topic for business development and marketing. It tends to not even be on the table at all, not something that's a part of your strategy, not something that's considered. But I argue that perhaps it should be. And there are a lot of reasons for this. So let's have a little perspective about certain things that happen when people leave firms or when firms change leadership. I had dinner once with the head of an IP group, the head of a corporate IP pharma company, and she opened up to me and said, I was working with this firm, and one day out of the blue, I got a letter. And the letter said something to the effect of, um, your files have been transferred over to my firm because the firm you were working with no longer handles intellectual property matters. And I just wanted to let you know that I have your files and that your work is safe with me. And that, mind blown. It maybe there's some world where that has some legitimacy, but I don't know that world. When I was in-house, I think there was kind of this expectation about what happens when a firm closes, when leadership changes, what we would expect to see in-house. And there are some considerations. There are ethical considerations. I am not a lawyer giving legal advice, but certainly I would check the bar association you're a member of to see if there are certain rules when it comes to what happens to your client's work should you die or retire. Let's say retire, or if you need to make a change, say you just want a career change, or something happens, insolvency, or life happens, and you can't compete. So in-house, on the corporate side, I would often receive communications. And when you're working with a lot of lawyers, it happens more frequently than you might expect. But the communications would be direct and they would be clear. And they would say something to the effect of, so and so is no longer going to be with our firm. Here are your options. Please affirmatively select the option you prefer. Sign this paper and return it to us. This is the best case scenario for due diligence. And it would say, we want our file to stay with your firm. We appreciate your services. We want our file to go to another firm. Please send it here. We want our file to be returned to us. And these are the general options you would expect to see. Now, this matters because if you want any sort of continuity, if you have a legacy you're trying to maintain, if that succession plan in place involves other people, maybe additional partners, maybe you're considering an internal transition, maybe there are third-party considerations, maybe for the preservation of dignity, all of these things, then this matters and you want to get it right. And because it does have an impact on whether or not there is continuity with the services, on your respect in the industry, on what happens to the other people around you. Now, maybe it's a little less consequential if you're a solo, if you have a very small team and you don't have a lot of corporate clients, but when you start to have a growing practice, when there are other people involved, it absolutely makes a difference. And Beck, I argue that this is something that should be considered for your business development and marketing strategies because what is your end game? If we're working towards specific goals for growth, if we're working towards specific goals for competition and market positioning, expanding practice areas, improving communications, all of these things, if one of the goals is to position yourself for a transition, that is absolutely something that should be considered. When I started to look into succession planning because different clients have approached us about it, maybe from the managerial advisory service aspect, or even in terms of marketing and business development for brokerage services, these are the kinds of things that I would discover, like only 40%, as reported in various trend analyses reports. Clio is the first one that comes to mind, but only approximately 40% of certain law firms have a succession plan. Now, the big guys, they have these things taken care of. They've had them taken care of forever. Nothing's going to happen when people leave. Sometimes things still happen, but they have sophisticated plans that have taken this into account. But even the big guys don't necessarily consider this in terms of marketing and business development at all. So what are your options? Let's think about this. If you're going to make a transition, you have basically four options, right? You can sell, get acquired, have, a whole acquisition involving your practice. You can have an internal transition to other partners who may still be with the practice. You can have an alignment with other firms where maybe the practice merges with another law firm out there, or has even an informal arrangement with another firm to make sure that there is continuity for the client services that existed before. Or, and sometimes people are really shocked when this is the recommendation, you can close, can shutter. And what does that look like? And in order to preserve your position, for the sake of the client work, but also for the sake of those around you, having that plan in place can absolutely make a difference to what happens to you later. Do you have a lasting legacy? Do you want to have some sort of arrangement in retirement to continue earning an income on the work that you've poured your heart and soul into for your entire career, especially if you're building a firm or your own practice within a firm? If you're a lawyer doing succession planning for yourself within the broader context of the firm that you work for, you definitely want to consider one of these four options, or even consider all of them and what they look like and what you would do. And make sure that you have a plan in place that says, well, under these circumstances, we have the option to go here or here. This is my preference now. If you need to have those relationships in place for selling your practice, or for transitioning, or even those informal relationships with other firms that can take over your work, consider them now. And that may even be something that leads to more work at present, where a firm that has spotted you that says, ooh, that practice looks interesting, I may want to have that practice come over to my firm and build out the IP department in a full service firm, or maybe just grow in general, or get rid of some competition. But if they're eyeing you, in some worlds, in some jurisdictions I've worked with, that can actually be a good thing, because they may refer work to you. They may help your position. They may want you to succeed because they see a future with you. And you could entertain those conversations very early on and have some sort of a plan in place, even if it's not a completely formal agreement. And maybe you are in a place where you absolutely need to have that formal agreement, but if you want to be acquired or sell your practice, there are certain steps that you need to take in advance. Of course, you need to figure out all of the logistics, what's required, but you also want to consider what your market position needs to be, what your valuation looks like. How do you even come up with that valuation? Now, I have spent a lot of time working in Latin America, and have been really surprised even today at how some of these transitions happen. And it's not just a matter necessarily of, oh, firm disappears, because in-house this would happen. It happen actually pretty frequently, especially with intellectual property, where you don't hear from a firm for a few years because you only hear from them when it's time for an annuity payment or a renewal for your intellectual property assets, or maybe because there's infringement or something of that nature. But if you don't hear from them for 6 months or a year, and then all of a sudden you don't hear from them ever because they're just gone, and then what do? Where are your files? Who has them? Who's going to do your work? And this may be a missed opportunity that you could have capitalized on by just having this plan in place and doing things a bit more professionally to capture maybe an ongoing income or an interest in a succeeding business beyond your own practice. So this is why I think it's so important to consider succession planning in the beginning, even annually. Take a look and see, do these relationships still matter? Is this plan still in place? But in Latin America, one of the things, this is what I was about to tell you, I'm really shocked sometimes to see kind of the traditional family firm still being very much a thing. It exists in the US too. We do have, there is a thing where children follow in their parents' footsteps, and maybe a lawyer sees the success of their parents and says, oh, I want to be a lawyer too. I can go work for my family firm. And, that's, of course, we want to support our children. Of course, this makes sense that you would see families coming together this way. One of the things, though, that blew my mind is seeing firms inherited. What? Really? Yes, really, this happens. Um, I've seen instances where people have acquired firms because someone in their family died. They may not even be a lawyer and have a law firm that they've inherited, a whole practice that they can then own, even if they're not necessarily a lawyer. Now, that's rare. I've only seen that in actually one instance, but it blew my mind so much and stuck with me that here it is. Um, but the family firm idea, the family firm model still is very much alive, and you still see it even in the firms that are attempting a meritocracy. Often you'll see the children of the owners or the managing partners come in later on. And I think there's a lot more balance now where obviously people are investing in education and making sure that the qualifications are there, or trying to make sure that it doesn't just look like nepotism, at its finest. They're trying to make it a little bit more legitimate, but these are children who have been raised in this environment, learning about the practice of their parents and having an understanding of what's required to run a firm. Maybe there is some relevance and merit to that as well, but that is something that across the board around the world I am seeing less of children taking over firms, but you do see a lot of people leaving firms to start their own practices in the face of that kind of a reality. And you see people planning for what comes next with the practice that they've got to protect these relationships with clients and the client work and where it goes from one to another. So how do you decide? How do you decide whether to sell, whether to shutter, whether to transition to another practice, and whether you want some sort of continuity after you move on? Well, you need to really take a look at all of the different options available to you, where the firm currently sits. This goes back to a live with Lys a few weeks ago we did on baselining. Figure out where you are. Figure out what options are actually available to you. Maybe your practice doesn't have what it takes to be acquired. Maybe there isn't enough interest, or maybe your market is saturated and you're facing forces that are beyond your control, where acquisition or, merging with another firm may not be a reality for you. And you need to reckon with that. If that is not your reality and you have to consider closing your practice, what does that look like? Is there still room for you to continue on somewhere else? Do you still have any sort of lasting investment that continues on even after you shutter? What do you have to do to communicate with your clients? What do you have to do to make sure that the people around you are taken care of? These are all considerations that are best considered while you're active in your profession, while you're successful, while you have um, the means to figure these things out, and not when something catastrophic happens out of your control that all of a sudden, you know, you are no more, and you can't control it and you have absolutely no influence on it. So, if you have questions about what this means for your practice, or about what your options are, but about how to be acquired, these are questions that we continuously consider and review, and in different jurisdictions around the world. We're happy to answer questions. As always, solutions@firmforward.com is how to find us, or www.firmforward.com is our website. We have a lot of information there too. And thank you for joining me on Live with Lys. Have a great rest of your week, everybody. And see you next time, hopefully. Yeah. Take care.